Chapter 16 of A Lucky Penny by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16, in which everything comes out all right. The next flash of lightning showed to Tom's staring eyes the small boat close under the ledge of the ugly black fang rock, which rose above the white foamy sea, and Dr. Hawk in the act of flinging poor little lame Dick Rogers upon it. Garland uttered a cry of horror, which the howling wind forced back down his throat again, and gazed wildly across that short span of boiling water. Again darkness intervened as an awful crash shivered the trembling air. The third electric glare pictured Dick clinging with one hand to the rock and the other extended toward Tom, while Dr. Hawk was to be seen bending to his oars, his boat rising like a feather on the waves. But retribution for the miscreant was at hand. Simultaneous with a terrific roar from the overcharged clouds came a bolt of electricity out of the rift of the black heavens, and it darted down like an avenging arrow of fire, straight at the doomed man in the boat. It was all over in a second, and the next flash showed only a vacant sea. Man and boat were gone as if they never had existed. Then the cry of his chum rang across the water. Helpless upon the fang rock, Dick awaited death, which approached nearer every moment with a steady rising of the tide. Again came his peal for help which seemed impossible to be given. Tom could not resist the impulse that came over him to save his little friend. He remembered they had promised to be chums till death came between them. He could not stand there in the storm and see the boy perish before his eyes. It might be madness to try and breast that space of raging water, though only 15 yards. But he was strong with sinews of steel. He could at least try for Dick's sake. To resolve was to act with Tom. He dived into the water and struck out for the rock. When he came to the surface, he found that the waves had swept him almost within reach of the fang. But the sweep of the sea carried him back to his starting point again. Then, as the water surged back, he went with it until he appeared to almost hover above the rock. He threw himself forward and landed beside Dick. "Oh, Tom!" cried the lame boy, throwing his arms around his friend's neck. Can you save me?" "I'll save you, chum, never fear, or we will go down together." Holding on till he had recovered his breath, while the hungry water, reaching for its prey, surged about their knees, Tom was ready for the final trial, to swim back with Dick. "Hold on tight to me, Dick," he said while he watched the water for a favorable moment to launch himself and his precious burden overboard. The moment came, and Tom plunged in. As he had calculated, the wave carried him so close to the spindle rocks that by a quick effort he was able to reach out and seize a jagged rock with both hands. The receding water tried to tear him from his hold, but he hung on with the grip of death, and a moment later climbed painfully up out of the water. His daring exploit was successful. The thunderstorm was rapidly passing shoreward, and the worst of their peril was over. Silently the two boys bowed their heads and thanked God for his mercy in saving them from the sea. Then they rejoined the frightened Amy and May in the hole under the lee of the spindle, where the sloop was riding out the storm in safety. 30 minutes later the wind had subsided to a brisk gale, and under double-reefed mainsail the party was once more afloat for Swampscott Beach. The sudden storm, brief as it proved to be, had driven the people of Swampscott into their homes and hotels. The 3 beaches and the bases of the picturesque headlands were white with rolling surf, where an hour before the water lapped gently upon the hard white sand and slimy rocks. Mr. and Mrs. Rockwell, aware that the young people had gone out on the sloop yacht, were wild with anxiety lest the little boat might have been swamped or dashed upon the rocks. As soon as the worst of the storm was over, Mr. Rockwell roused out many of the permanent residents, hardy-looking fishermen, and started to scour the shore. At length one of the men saw the sloop through his glass, and the cheery news was carried to Mr. Rockwell. It was not long before he had his little daughter in his arms and Tom by the hand. Then all returned to the villa, and you may well believe Garland had a thrilling story to tell of how he saved Dick from Fang Rock. "I hardly know how I accomplished it," he said in conclusion. "It was fate's will that Dick was not to perish," replied Mr. Rockwell solemnly. "At least we have the satisfaction of knowing that Dick's deadly enemy has perished, and now nothing stands between him and his own," said Tom. "Dr. Hawk has paid the penalty of his wickedness." 2 months later, at Dick's request, Mr. Rockwell was legally appointed his guardian, and thereafter the boy wanted for nothing. Before Tom went on his first fall trip, he invested his money, on the advice of a well-informed friend in the financial world, in Canadian Pacific stock on a 10% margin. His friend to close the deal during his absence if he deemed best. He purchased 600 shares at $140, depositing $8,400 as security with the broker. It was a remarkably fortunate investment, for the stock began to go up almost immediately at a steady rate. In the course of a couple of months, a well-founded rumor of an oil strike on a portion of the company's land created intense excitement on the market, and the stock rose in bounds to $175, where it held firm, and no attack of the bears could weaken it. At that figure, the broker was instructed by Tom's friend to sell out the stock, and a check for $29,250 above all expenses of the deal was handed to Mr. Rockwell to deposit in the bank to Tom's account. He had made an actual profit of nearly $21,000 by the transaction. About this time, the detective agency employed in the boy's interest discovered that Mr. Sleek was negotiating the sale of a valuable tract of western land. This clue being followed up, it was found that the property had belonged to Tom's father, and until a year previous had been deemed of little value. The discovery of ore in the neighborhood had caused some excitement in that direction, which had come to Mr. Sleek's ears, and being an artful individual, he determined to possess himself of the property. He had done a favor once on a time for his friend Captain Boone, and he thought the captain would be willing to reciprocate, and he was not wrong in his surmise, especially as Mr. Sleek accompanied his request with a promise of numerous dollars if the captain not only carried the boy off to sea, but saw to it that Tom was disposed of in a way that would prevent his return to America. As Captain Boone knew of an island where Garland could be safely marooned with small hope of rescue, the plot promised well until Tom, as we have seen, discovered his uncle's perfidy and took effective means to circumvent him. Foiled in this, Mr. Sleek decided to try and gobble up the value of the land on the quiet, and he would have succeeded but for the method pursued by Mr. Rockwell for his detection. The result of it all was that Mr. Sleek was cornered, compelled to disgorge, and was only saved from a term in the state prison by Tom's generosity, as well as desire to prevent disgrace from publicly smirching any branch of the family. The exposure of Mr. Bentley Wick's industrial farm came out without any assistance from Tom Garland or Dick Rogers. Certain facts leaked out, came to the ear of the editor of a Boston paper, and the newspaper didn't do a thing to Mr. Wicks and his establishment. Mr. Wicks found it desirable to skip out of the state with his family, and the institution became a thing of the past. The sign for sale was put on the front wall, and the prospect of another long term of disuse and neglect seemed to await the property, when Tom Garland and Dick Rogers stepped in and bought the property, at a great bargain, between them. The old Revolutionary building was swept away with its stone wall, and the truck patch was also included in the improvements which followed. 6 fine villas were erected there overlooking Boston Bay, 5 of which were sold to good advantage, the boys making a handsome profit. But the finest one was reserved by the boys and merely rented. In 6 months Tom celebrated his 19th year with 2 notable events. He disposed of his 20 acres of land near Jamaica Plains for the sum of $10,000 to a syndicate, which proposed to cut the property up into building lots and boom the place. Thus he made a matter of over $50,000 by his own sagacity inside of a year and a half, from the day he and Dick landed in Boston without a cent. A second event, and the more important one, was Tom Garland's engagement to Miss Amy Dent, Mrs. Rockwell's niece, with the understanding that the young couple were to be married when Tom attained his majority. It is understood that they will live in the East Boston villa, and that Dick Rogers will live there with them after he graduates from Harvard. And Tom believes Dick is more than half right when he asserts that all of his chum's good fortune started from the day he came into possession of the bright new cent which he still calls his lucky penny. The end. End of chapter 16. End of A Lucky Penny by a Self-Made Man. Recording by Keith Salis.